She woke up before the sun even touched the city skyline, the soft hum of early morning traffic barely audible through the thin curtains of her small apartment. Another day at the hotel awaited her. Another day of serving the wealthy, polished guests who seemed to float through life with a sense of entitlement she could never quite understand. She yawned and stretched, feeling the familiar ache in her arms and back, muscles already tense from years of long shifts and heavy trays. Her breakfast was simple, a slice of toast and a cup of tea, but she ate slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the chaos of the day. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, noting the tired lines around her eyes. No one would think she had a secret, something that set her apart from the people she served day after day. No one would guess that behind her apron and careful smile, she carried the heart of a musician, someone who could make a piano sing in ways that could make people forget the world around them. At the hotel, she slipped into her uniform and tied her hair back neatly, ready to become invisible once more. The lobby was already buzzing with activity. Bellhops rushing past with luggage, managers discussing last-minute arrangements for events, and guests stepping out of luxury cars with air of expectation. She moved among them, carrying trays of drinks, refilling glasses, and remembering to smile, even when a guest frowned at something insignificant. She had learned to navigate this world without letting it crush her spirit. It was a special evening tonight. The hotel had planned an exclusive dinner event for a group of elite guests, and there was a sense of excitement in the air that she could almost taste. The usual pianist, someone who performed regularly for these events, had called in sick. The management had scrambled, looking for a replacement, but no one had been found. She paused near the grand piano in the corner of the dining room, her fingers itching with a longing that she could hardly ignore. It sat there, polished and gleaming, waiting silently for someone to awaken its voice. As she prepared the tables, she overheard snippets of conversation. Some guests commented on the missing musician, expressing mild disappointment. Others laughed and joked among themselves, confident that the absence of music wouldn't ruin their night. She felt a pang of sadness and curiosity. Music was never just background to her. It was a language, a way to reach people that words could never touch. She thought back to her childhood, to the first time she had touched the piano keys. The warm, resonant tones had captivated her immediately, and from that moment, she had spent hours every day learning, practicing, and perfecting. Her parents had been supportive but practical, knowing she needed to find a way to make a living, which had led her here, to serving tables instead of performing on grand stages. But every note she played in secret, every melody she memorized, reminded her that she belonged somewhere beyond the hotel lobby. The other staff buzzed around her, preparing for the evening. She moved quickly, setting up chairs, arranging silverware, and double-checking everything to ensure it met the high standards of the hotel. Guests began to arrive, each more polished and confident than the last. They wore expensive suits and elegant dresses, carrying the air of people who were used to being admired, envied, and obeyed. She greeted them with polite smiles, hiding the curiosity and nervous excitement that stirred inside her. As the room began to fill, a manager approached, whispering hurriedly. The pianist had not arrived, and the atmosphere was tense. Some guests had started murmuring, clearly noticing the missing entertainment. The manager's eyes flicked toward her for a brief second, and she felt a flutter in her chest. A passing joke escaped from another staff member. "Maybe our waitress can play?" It was said with a laugh, but she felt a spark ignite within her. Could she? Should she? Her hands itched, recalling the countless hours she had spent practicing, imagining herself performing for an audience. But this was different. These were people who could be critical, people whose judgments carried weight. She glanced at the piano again, its polished surface gleaming under the soft lights. It seemed almost to beckon her, whispering a promise of something extraordinary if she dared to step forward. She took a deep breath and excused herself from the preparations. Each step toward the piano was heavy with anticipation and fear, yet lighter with hope. Her mind raced through melodies she knew by heart, thinking of pieces that could captivate the room without warning anyone of her true talent. She adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. The room hummed with chatter and laughter, but in that moment, everything seemed to slow, as if the world itself was waiting for her next move. Her first notes were tentative, soft, almost hesitant, but each one was deliberate, filled with the emotion she had carried for years. The melody began to unfold, simple at first, catching the attention of a few nearby guests who had paused mid-conversation. Slowly, the room started to quiet. People turned, curious about the sound that seemed to weave itself through the air, gentle but insistent. With every passing moment, her confidence grew. The melody became richer, the harmonies more complex, her fingers moving with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting her art in secret. Eyes widened around the room, mouths fell open slightly in surprise. They had assumed this was just a waitress, someone who served them their drinks and meals, someone ordinary. They could not have imagined the depth of skill hidden behind her calm exterior. As the music continued, a shift began to occur. The elite guests, who had previously held themselves apart, now leaned forward, drawn into the spell of her performance. Conversations stopped entirely, replaced by an almost tangible awe. The room, once filled with polite murmurs, now vibrated with the power of her talent. She played not for recognition, not for reward, but because this was who she was, the truest part of herself finally finding expression. Time seemed to stretch, each note hanging in the air longer than it should, filling the corners of the room and reaching into hearts. She noticed a few people had tears in their eyes, some smiled in disbelief, and others simply sat frozen, unable to move or speak. Her heart raced, but in a way that was exhilarating, freeing, and deeply satisfying. For the first time in a long while, she felt fully seen, fully alive. The piano was no longer an object in the corner of a dining room. It was an extension of her voice, her soul, and her courage. And as she continued to play, a thought emerged, simple but profound. Talent, passion, and courage could break through even the most imposing walls of doubt and expectation. Even as she played quietly, almost modestly, she knew the night had changed forever. Not just for her, but for everyone who was fortunate enough to hear her music. The room was alive with the soft clinking of glasses and hushed murmurs as the evening progressed. Guests adjusted in their seats, their conversations drifting lazily through the air, but the absence of music still lingered like a small, nagging emptiness. The hotel staff moved swiftly, ensuring that every detail was perfect, yet she couldn't shake the thought of the grand piano in the corner. Its glossy surface caught the light from the chandeliers, glinting as if calling out to her, promising something beyond the ordinary service she provided. She carried plates of food to the tables, maintaining her calm smile, nodding politely at compliments about the food or polite inquiries about their evening plans. Guests complimented the meals, expressed satisfaction, and yet a subtle frustration remained, a quiet longing for the music that should have filled the room. Some whispered among themselves, remarking on the missing pianist, while others shrugged, unconcerned, confident that their evening would still be delightful. She overheard snippets, phrases like, "I can't believe they don't have music tonight," and "It feels incomplete without someone at that piano." Her chest tightened with a mixture of longing and hesitation. She knew she could fill that void, but the thought of stepping into the limelight in front of these critical eyes was intimidating. Still, she felt a stirring of excitement. Perhaps tonight could be different. Perhaps tonight was the night her hidden talent could finally touch others. Her mind flickered to her childhood, the countless hours she had spent practicing, the nights when music had been her only companion. Every melody she had mastered, every harmony she had memorized, had prepared her for moments like this. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let those skills speak. She paused by the piano under the soft glow of the overhead lights. Her fingers hovered above the keys as she considered the risk. Could she, a mere waitress, really perform in front of these guests and command their attention? The thought of rejection and embarrassment brushed against her, but it was quickly replaced by a stronger urge. The need to express herself, the need to let the music flow freely. She took a deep breath, recalling the lessons, the practice sessions, the times she had played in solitude, imagining a stage, imagining an audience moved by the notes she played. She had rehearsed for this moment her entire life, though she had never known the stage would be a hotel dining room. Nearby, a few staff members chatted quietly, unaware of her internal debate. One of them made a light-hearted comment, suggesting that maybe she could try to play. The words were spoken in jest, but they lit a spark within her. A nervous excitement coursed through her veins, and without fully realizing it, she found herself sitting at the piano, adjusting the bench, and letting her fingers rest on the keys. The room's chatter seemed to fade, replaced by an almost magical silence. Even if only for a moment, it felt as though the world itself had paused. Her first notes were tentative, delicate, and soft. They floated across the room, barely noticeable at first, yet enough to capture the attention of a few observant guests. She smiled to herself, feeling the familiar rhythm of playing, the comfort of the instrument beneath her hands. With each note, her confidence grew, and the simple melody she had chosen began to take shape, gradually filling the room with sound. Some guests looked up from their conversations, their expressions shifting from curiosity to surprise. They had not expected this, and the music wove a gentle spell that started to captivate everyone. She allowed the melody to flow naturally, her fingers moving with practiced ease, drawing on years of dedication and silent perseverance. The music was no longer tentative. It was alive, vibrant, and emotive. Her nerves melted away, replaced by a deep sense of purpose. Every chord struck a chord within the room, drawing people closer to the sound, bridging the gap between the world of the guests and her own private world of music. She noticed a few of them exchanging glances, clearly impressed and a little bewildered. A woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin, and a man whispered to his companion, unable to contain his admiration. With each passing minute, she grew more confident, allowing her own emotions to guide the performance. She recalled the lessons of her past, the instructors who had pushed her to feel the music rather than just play the notes. Tonight, that advice became her anchor. She played with passion, letting the melody rise and fall naturally, carrying the listeners through a journey they had never anticipated. The piano was no longer an object in the corner. It was an extension of her voice, her expression, and her courage. Some of the guests leaned forward, drawn in by the unexpected brilliance of the performance. The air shifted from polite formality to something richer, something human and profound. Conversations had ceased entirely, replaced by attentive silence. She could see the awe in their eyes, the subtle gestures of hands resting on the table, fingers tapping softly to the rhythm of her music. Even those who had been quietly critical before were now captivated, unable to look away or think of anything other than the music that filled the room. Her mind wandered briefly to the irony of it all. The very people who had barely noticed her as she served them were now completely absorbed in her performance. It was a moment of vindication, yes, but also a moment of joy and connection. She realized that talent could break through preconceptions, that a simple act of courage could transform the ordinary into something unforgettable. Every note she played carried a piece of her story, her struggle, and her dedication, and it resonated with the guests in ways that words never could. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the beauty of the music. She played with a fluidity that surprised even herself, letting the melody evolve, building tension, releasing it, creating a dynamic flow that held everyone spellbound. She could feel the collective energy of the room responding to her, a subtle rhythm of awe and admiration that coursed through every listener. She smiled softly, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction. This was why she had practiced, why she had persevered. This was why music mattered. As the performance reached its gentle conclusion, a pause lingered in the air, a moment suspended in time. The last note resonated, fading into silence, leaving behind a palpable sense of wonder. Guests sat for a heartbeat longer, reluctant to break the spell, before slowly clapping, their applause growing louder with each passing second. Some rose to their feet, stunned and inspired by the realization that the talented performer had been among them all along, unnoticed and underestimated. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from exhilaration. The standing ovation washed over her like a wave, a mixture of shock, admiration, and deep respect from people she had once believed could never see her for who she truly was. She allowed herself a small bow, acknowledging the recognition with humility, but her eyes sparkled with a quiet triumph. The moment was hers, earned through years of dedication and courage, and it was one she would never forget. Afterward, the manager approached, his expression a mix of surprise and admiration. He offered sincere congratulations, unable to conceal his astonishment at the unexpected performance. Some guests lingered, complimenting her on the skill and emotion she had conveyed, eager to express their astonishment and appreciation. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone who served, but as a musician, as a creator, and as a person whose passion had the power to move others deeply. That night, as she walked home, the city lights reflecting softly on wet pavement, she replayed the events in her mind. She felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. The piano, the notes, the faces of the captivated guests. They were all a part of something bigger than herself, yet intimately connected to her own journey. It was a night that had started like any other, but it had transformed into something extraordinary, a memory she would carry forever, a reminder that courage and talent, when embraced, could change lives in ways that no one could predict. The following morning, the city felt softer, quieter, as though it too had paused to marvel at the night before. She woke slowly, still carrying the lingering echo of applause in her mind. It had been one of those rare moments when time seemed suspended, when the world around her disappeared and left only the music and the wonder in the room. Even now, she could feel the adrenaline of performing, the rhythm of her fingers on the keys, the gaze of those guests, wide-eyed and surprised. It was intoxicating, a feeling she had longed for silently for years. As she prepared for another day at the hotel, she wondered how the night would be remembered. Would anyone talk about it in hushed admiration, as she hoped, or would it be forgotten as quickly as the fleeting events of a busy hotel evening? She dressed carefully, the uniform feeling heavier now, weighed down by the secret she carried with her. A secret that was no longer hidden. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to hold a new sense of confidence, a spark she had not dared to recognize before. She brushed her hair back and took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering excitement that stirred within her. Arriving at the hotel, the lobby already thrummed with the usual activity. Staff moved quickly, guests checked in, bellhops rushed past, and she smiled politely at familiar faces, all the while feeling the undercurrent of something different in the air. Some of the staff looked at her with subtle curiosity, whispers passing between them as they recalled the extraordinary performance. Even management seemed a little more attentive, their eyes lingering just a fraction longer than before. It was clear that her music had left a mark, small but undeniable. The day passed in its usual rhythm, carrying trays, serving tables, and answering polite questions with a practiced smile. Yet, she felt a subtle shift in the way guests treated her. Some nodded in greeting with new respect, others offered compliments tinged with curiosity, asking softly if she had always been this talented. Each acknowledgement brought a mix of pride and humility, but also a small, growing courage. Perhaps it was time to consider that her life could include more than just serving meals, that her music had a place in the world beyond the quiet corners of her apartment. By the evening, the hotel was preparing for another event. She noticed the grand piano again, its polished surface gleaming in the soft light. The pianist for the night had arrived on time, but the memory of last night's performance lingered in her mind, tempting her to imagine what might have happened if she had played even more boldly, if she had let herself truly take control of the room. The thought was thrilling and terrifying all at once, and she found herself lingering near the piano, imagining the melody she could create, the story she could tell through music. A small commotion drew her attention. A guest had misplaced an important item and needed assistance. As she helped, the conversation shifted to the piano and the missing musician from the previous night. Some laughed in disbelief at the surprise of it all, while others admitted to having been moved by the music, touched in ways they hadn't expected. She listened quietly, letting the words wash over her, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her chest. Her music had made an impact, even if the world around her often felt indifferent. It was proof that she could reach people, that her voice, through the piano, had power. Later, while clearing tables, she noticed a small child staring curiously at the piano. The child's eyes widened, and they whispered to their parent, pointing toward the instrument with fascination. The parent smiled, explaining softly that someone had played beautifully here the night before. She felt a surge of connection, realizing that her music could inspire others, even the youngest among the guests. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine the possibilities, the doors that could open if she embraced her talent fully. The piano continued to call to her, silent yet persistent. She found herself sitting on the bench once again, fingers tracing the keys, recalling the melodies that had moved the previous night's guests. Though she knew she would not perform again tonight, just the act of touching the keys brought a sense of calm and satisfaction. Music had always been her refuge, a place where she could express emotions that words could never capture. And now, it had become a bridge between her and the world she served, a subtle reminder of who she truly was. As the evening progressed, she noticed the expressions of the guests subtly changing. Conversations softened, laughter carried a different tone, and even the staff seemed to move with a heightened attentiveness, as if the memory of the performance had lingered in their minds. She realized that a single act of courage, a brief willingness to step into the spotlight, could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. It was not about fame or recognition. It was about connection, about sharing something deeply personal and witnessing the quiet, transformative power it had on others. During a brief lull, a manager approached her quietly. He complimented her on her talent once more, mentioning that several guests had asked about the musician from the previous night. He encouraged her subtly, hinting that there might be opportunities to perform again, perhaps even more regularly. She felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The thought of performing in front of such elite audiences was daunting, yet undeniably thrilling. It was a challenge, yes, but also an invitation to step fully into the life she had long imagined in secret. As she walked home that night, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement, reflecting her thoughts back at her in soft, fractured patterns. She carried the memory of last night with her, replaying the notes and the faces of the guests, the subtle awe that had filled the room. It was a reminder that courage and passion could break through the most ordinary of routines, that hidden talents could emerge at unexpected moments, and that her journey was only beginning. The night was calm, yet her heart felt alive with possibility, aware that her music could carry her far beyond the walls of the hotel, far beyond the world she had once accepted as her own. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could embrace both her daily life and her passion. The thought was exhilarating, like the first notes of a new melody yet to be played, full of potential and promise. She knew there would be challenges, moments of doubt and hesitation, but she also knew that the courage she had shown last night had opened a door. The piano, once a hidden companion, had become a bridge to a world she had long dreamed of, and she felt a quiet determination to see where that path might lead. Tonight, she walked not just as a waitress, but as someone who had glimpsed the extraordinary within the ordinary, someone whose music could touch hearts and inspire even the most skeptical of listeners. The evening air inside the hotel dining room felt thick with expectation. Guests arrived dressed in elegant attire, their polished smiles masking the subtle anxieties of high social expectations. She moved through the room carrying trays with practiced ease, greeting familiar faces and offering polite attention. Yet beneath the surface, her thoughts drifted to the piano tucked away in the corner, its polished surface glinting under the chandelier light. Every time she passed it, a small shiver of anticipation ran down her spine. It was not just an instrument. It was a portal to a world where she felt alive, a world where she could speak without words. The regular pianist had arrived tonight, a tall, serious-looking individual who sat up quickly, tuning the piano and checking the sheet music. She watched from a distance, her fingers brushing the edge of a nearby table, feeling a mix of nerves and longing. A part of her wished she could sit down and play, to share the melodies that had lived quietly in her heart for years. But she held back, knowing this was not her moment tonight, or so she thought. The event began. Guests took their seats, sipping champagne and exchanging polite conversation. The pianist started playing, a soft melody that complemented the ambience but lacked the soul-stirring depth she had always imagined. She watched the guests' expressions shift subtly. Some listened politely, but others seemed restless, their attention drifting, their eyes searching the room. She felt a small pang, a longing to step forward and offer something that could truly touch them. As she moved to refill glasses, she overheard a whispered conversation at one of the tables. A guest remarked that the music was pleasant but expected, lacking a spark, a surprise. Something inside her stirred. This was the moment she had imagined countless times, the chance to show what music could do when played with heart, with passion. Her pulse quickened, a combination of fear and exhilaration. She had always been careful, staying in the background, but tonight, the urge to share her gift was almost overwhelming. She found a quiet moment near the piano, her fingers brushing the keys as if testing the waters. The music from the pianist continued, but her mind danced with possibilities. She could sit down and play, starting softly, almost tentatively, letting the melody grow naturally, slowly capturing the attention of the room. It would be daring, unexpected, and risky, but the thought of the guests' reactions, the chance to move them, filled her with a courage she had never felt before. During a brief pause in the pianist's piece, she took a deep breath. No one was watching closely, and the room was preoccupied with small talk and glasses clinking. She slid onto the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. A hush seemed to fall around her, even if only in her own perception, as if the room itself was holding its breath. She began with a simple, delicate melody, soft and unassuming. It drew curious glances from nearby tables. Guests turned their heads, intrigued by the unexpected sound, their conversations slowly fading into attentive silence. Her confidence grew with each note. The melody evolved naturally, flowing effortlessly from her fingers. The music was no longer tentative. It had become expressive, full of emotion and subtle complexity. The room transformed around her. Guests who had been chatting politely now leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected brilliance of her playing. The sound carried through the space, weaving itself into the fabric of the evening, turning ordinary moments into something magical. She let the music guide her, her fingers dancing over the keys, drawing on years of practice and the quiet dedication that had defined her life. Each chord resonated deeply, touching the hearts of the listeners. She noticed subtle shifts in the room. A guest's hand resting lightly on the table, a smile tugging at the corner of another's lips, eyes wide in awe. Her performance was no longer just an act. It was a connection, a silent conversation between her and every person present. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the beauty of the music. She played with a fluidity that surprised even herself, weaving together complex harmonies and gentle crescendos that rose and fell naturally. The room was silent except for the piano, each note a thread that pulled the guests closer to the emotional core of the performance. The guests who had once been distant, aloof, or indifferent now sat rapt, unable to look away or think of anything other than the music that filled the space. She felt a thrill, a quiet joy, in seeing the effect of her music. The applause from last night had been satisfying, but the way the notes themselves seemed to capture attention, to move people without a single word, was transformative. She realized that music could transcend social barriers, could dissolve the walls of skepticism and expectation, and reach people in their truest form. Even those who had never noticed her before were now fully aware of her presence, her talent, and the depth of her expression. As the piece reached its climax, she let the melody soar, delicate and powerful at the same time. The guests were completely absorbed, some leaning in instinctively, others closing their eyes as if to better feel the music. A few tears glistened on cheeks, subtle and silent, but unmistakable. She played not for recognition or reward, but because this was who she was, the truest version of herself finding expression through each note. The final chord lingered in the air, echoing softly around the room. Silence hung for a heartbeat before the first claps began, tentative and then growing in volume and intensity. Guests rose to their feet, some with wide-eyed astonishment, others with smiles that spoke of pure admiration. She allowed herself a small bow, feeling a rush of pride and relief, humbled by the overwhelming response. The music had reached them. Her secret talent, once hidden, had been revealed in the most beautiful way. Afterward, the pianist returned, looking slightly bewildered, and she quietly returned to her role as waitress, carrying trays with the same practiced grace but a new sense of confidence. Management approached, offering compliments and subtle acknowledgement, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. Guests continued to speak in hushed tones, exchanging amazed glances, some even seeking her out to express their admiration personally. She finished her shift with a quiet satisfaction, her heart full of the night's triumphs. The hotel, the guests, the staff all seemed changed in some small way by her music. Even she felt different, more alive, more certain that her talent had a place beyond the confines of private practice. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice, a bridge, and a key to possibilities she had long dreamed of. As she left the hotel and stepped into the cool night air, she carried with her the memory of the captivated faces, the standing ovation, and the unspoken connection that only music could create. It was a night that would linger, not just in her memory, but in the hearts of everyone fortunate enough to hear her play. The next morning, the hotel staff buzzed with excitement as they recalled the events of the previous evening. Guests had left glowing remarks about the music, praising the performance that had captured everyone unexpectedly. She arrived early, carrying her tray and greeting colleagues with polite smiles, feeling a quiet satisfaction that hadn't faded since last night. Even in the routine of setting tables and arranging silverware, she sensed that something had shifted in the air, a subtle acknowledgement of her talent that went beyond the polite nods and standard pleasantries she usually received. As the day went on, word of the performance spread quietly among the guests who had stayed for breakfast or returned for meetings. Several of them approached her personally, asking if she had been the one who had played the piano the night before. When she confirmed with a shy smile, they reacted with disbelief mixed with admiration. Some guests shook their heads, murmuring about how unexpected it was that a waitress could possess such skill. Others smiled warmly, expressing a newfound respect, as though seeing her music had revealed something genuine and remarkable about her character. Even management approached her with compliments, commending her courage and talent. They suggested that she might consider performing at future events, not just as a novelty, but as a featured musician. She listened quietly, a mix of surprise and excitement stirring in her chest. The thought of performing regularly for an audience of discerning guests was both thrilling and intimidating, but the memory of last night's performance gave her confidence. She knew that music was not just a skill. It was a language through which she could connect with others, and the response from the guests had proven it. Throughout the day, she reflected on the significance of what had happened. The applause, the standing ovation, the captivated faces. They were all evidence that hidden talent could emerge in unexpected ways, that courage could transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. She walked through the hotel corridors with a sense of quiet pride, aware that her life had shifted subtly, that the perception of her had changed, and that opportunities she had never imagined might now be within reach. As the evening approached, she prepared for her shift with a mix of anticipation and calm. The grand piano still occupied its place in the dining room, polished and gleaming, as if silently acknowledging the momentous events of the night before. Guests began to arrive, dressed in their evening best, some of them remembering the performance with quiet awe. She greeted each one politely, maintaining the grace and composure that had always been part of her routine, but now infused with the quiet confidence that came from being recognized for something deeply personal and meaningful. During the dinner service, several guests lingered near the piano, speaking in hushed tones about the performance. They wondered aloud who had played so beautifully, expressing admiration and curiosity. Some approached her quietly, complimenting her once again, their words carrying genuine appreciation rather than polite flattery. Each interaction reinforced her sense that her music had created a ripple effect, touching people in ways that went beyond the superficial, resonating on a personal and emotional level. At one point, a family with children approached her. The children were fascinated by the piano, their eyes wide with wonder. The parents explained that someone had played a stunning piece the night before, and the children asked if she could play for them. She smiled warmly, her heart lifting at the thought of sharing music with them. Though she could not perform fully while working, she allowed herself a brief, soft melody, letting the children listen for a few moments. Their delighted expressions filled her with a sense of joy and purpose, reinforcing the idea that music could inspire and connect across generations. As the evening progressed, the hotel staff began to acknowledge her in subtle ways. Colleagues who had once seen her only as a diligent worker now looked at her with quiet respect. They whispered among themselves about her talent, sharing the story of her performance with other staff members. The atmosphere within the hotel shifted slightly, no longer merely routine and efficient, but filled with a sense of pride and admiration for someone who had revealed an extraordinary gift. Later, as she took a brief moment to rest, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Years of practice, dedication, and perseverance had led to this point, where her music could touch the hearts of strangers and transform a simple evening into something memorable. She realized that courage, even in small doses, had the power to change perceptions, to break through assumptions, and to reveal the true depth of a person's abilities. The performance had not just been an act of music, but an act of self-expression, a statement of identity, and a quiet victory over years of invisibility. By the end of her shift, the evening had drawn to a close. Guests left the dining room with smiles and lingering conversations, many of them still discussing the remarkable performance. She packed up her belongings and prepared to leave, carrying with her the sense that her life had subtly shifted. The recognition, the respect, and the small, meaningful connections forged through her music had created an entirely new chapter. She felt a quiet determination to continue exploring her talent, to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead, and to allow her music to touch even more people. Walking home through the softly lit streets, she reflected on the events of the past 2 nights. The journey from serving tables to being recognized for her music was not just about talent. It was about courage, perseverance, and the willingness to step into the unknown. She understood that every note she played was more than sound. It was a bridge to the hearts of those who listened. And as she imagined the future, she felt a deep sense of hope and purpose, ready to embrace the possibilities that awaited her, confident that her music could continue to inspire and transform the lives of those who heard it. The days that followed felt different. She moved through her work at the hotel with the same diligence, carrying trays, arranging silverware, and greeting guests with her practiced smile. But something inside her had shifted. There was a quiet confidence now, an awareness that her talent had been seen, appreciated, and celebrated. Guests looked at her differently, colleagues whispered in admiration, and management began to hint at opportunities she had never imagined. The piano, once just a beautiful object in the corner of the dining room, had become a symbol of possibility, a reminder that courage and skill could open doors that had seemed firmly closed. Even as she performed her usual tasks, she found herself thinking about music constantly. She spent her breaks near the piano, letting her fingers trace the keys, experimenting with melodies, and imagining performances that went beyond the hotel's dining room. The excitement that had once been restrained, hidden behind careful smiles and long hours of service, now bubbled quietly within her, ready to be shared with anyone willing to listen. Each note she played carried not just sound, but emotion, memory, and the quiet story of her life, unspoken yet deeply understood. Guests continued to speak of the performance from the night she had first revealed her skill. Many of them returned, eager to hear more, asking if the pianist was the same as before, and expressing hope that she might play again. She responded with humility, acknowledging their compliments with a gentle smile, but inside, a quiet pride grew stronger. She had always loved music, but now she understood its power, not only to fill the room with beauty, but to create a connection between people, a shared experience that could change perceptions and hearts. Management approached her one day, quietly suggesting that she might consider performing more regularly at hotel events. She listened carefully, a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation stirring within her. The idea of stepping fully into the spotlight was daunting, yet the memory of the previous performances, the awe, the smiles, the subtle tears, gave her courage. She realized that her life did not have to be limited to serving tables alone. Her talent could flourish, her music could be heard, and she could share a piece of herself with the world. She began to accept invitations to play at small hotel gatherings, each performance drawing admiration and quiet excitement. Guests looked forward to hearing her, often returning specifically to experience the magic of her music. With each performance, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved more fluidly over the keys, and her understanding of her own abilities deepened. She learned to interpret each melody, to let emotion guide her playing, and to connect with listeners in ways that were both intimate and profound. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a voice, a bridge, and a companion on her journey towards self-expression and fulfillment. Her colleagues began to notice the change in her. They watched with respect and admiration as she moved from serving tables to performing melodies that filled the room with emotion. Some quietly asked her questions, seeking to learn about her dedication, her practice routines, and the courage it took to perform in front of strangers. She shared her experiences gently, encouraging them to explore their own passions, whatever they might be. The hotel itself seemed to shift subtly around her, its atmosphere richer, more vibrant, as if recognizing the presence of someone who had dared to step beyond expectation. As time passed, she began to perform at more significant events, her music becoming a staple of the hotel's evenings. Guests spoke of her skill with wonder, and some even requested personal performances for private gatherings. Each time, she played with humility and grace, remembering the moment when she had first decided to sit at the piano despite fear and doubt. Those memories fueled her dedication, reminding her that talent, when embraced, could transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. She played not for recognition alone, but because it was a fundamental part of who she was, a truth that demanded to be expressed. The recognition extended beyond the hotel. Word spread through social media, friends of guests shared stories, and she began to receive messages from people she had never met, praising her talent and courage. Invitations to perform at other venues arrived cautiously at first, and then more frequently, each one offering a chance to explore her gift in new settings. She accepted selectively, valuing quality over quantity, and always returning to the hotel, her place of balance and stability. Her life had changed, yet it still retained the familiar rhythm of everyday work, grounding her even as her music opened doors she had once thought unreachable. Through it all, she remained humble, aware of the fragility of success and the importance of passion over fame. She taught herself to balance performance with service, ambition with gratitude, and recognition with humility. Music became not only a profession but a calling, a way to touch lives and leave a quiet, lasting impact. Each note she played was infused with the experiences that had shaped her. The long hours of service, the hidden dedication to practice, the courage to take risks, and the joy of finally being seen. Years later, as she looked back on that first night at the hotel, she remembered the nervous anticipation, the tentative notes, and the awe that followed. That night had been a turning point, a moment when hidden talent and quiet courage intersected to change the course of her life. The applause, the recognition, and the subtle but profound connections she had created through her music remained vivid in her memory. She understood now that every challenge, every ordinary day had led to this moment. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a gateway to self-discovery, opportunity, and the realization that extraordinary things often begin in the most ordinary places. Walking through the quiet streets after a performance, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had been shaped by persistence, passion, and a willingness to step into the unknown. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, and that talent, when nurtured and shared, could touch lives in ways she had never imagined. The city lights reflected softly on the pavement, echoing the warmth in her heart and the quiet pride she carried. She had transformed not only her own life but also the lives of those who had listened, reminding them that beauty, talent, and passion could appear when least expected and leave a lasting impact. Her story became a quiet inspiration for many, a tale of hidden potential realized and the extraordinary emerging from the ordinary. She continued to serve, to play, and to inspire, knowing that her music had the power to connect hearts and leave memories that would linger long after the last note faded. Every performance was a reminder that talent could be found in unexpected places, that courage could change lives, and that the simplest decisions, like choosing to play a single note, could echo into a lifetime of fulfillment and meaning. In the end, she understood that her journey was not just about music, but about discovering the strength within herself and sharing it with the world in a way that was genuine, touching, and unforgettable.